Elon Musk has just done something that shook Washington, Wall Street, and every capital watching the escalating Canada trade conflict. He didn't whisper his disagreement through advisors. He didn't bury concerns in a corporate earnings call. Instead, he stepped directly into the public arena and openly broke with Donald Trump over the trade war with Canada. The message was not subtle. Through a long interview, a series of social media posts, and a formal written statement distributed through Tesla's investor relations channel, Musk laid out a detailed account of what he witnessed inside the administration's trade strategy. What he revealed was explosive. Musk described conversations he personally had with Trump, internal briefings that were prepared by economists but ignored, and warnings delivered by industry leaders that were brushed aside. According to Musk, the entire tariff strategy was not built on economic analysis. It was built on messaging. Messaging designed to appear strong, but not designed to survive real-world consequences. And now those consequences are hitting American industries across every sector the tariffs were supposedly meant to protect. And honestly, when you hear that from someone who is actually in the room, it hits differently. This is not speculation from outside observers. This is someone who sat across the table, looked at the data, and watched decisions being made anyway. Musk revealed that Trump had been given a comprehensive economic analysis prepared by his own Council of Economic Advisors. This wasn't a short memo. It wasn't a one-page briefing. It was a detailed report supported by industry data from Tesla, General Motors, Ford, and major trade associations. The analysis laid out in clear numbers that the tariffs would hurt American manufacturers more than Canadian ones. But according to Musk, Trump never read it. He said he knew the president hadn't read the briefing because 2 days later he asked Trump about specific conclusions inside the report. Trump had no idea what Musk was referring to. The entire analysis had been dismissed as overly pessimistic. The tariff decision, Musk said, was made based on political instinct rather than economic modeling. Think about that for a moment. A policy affecting hundreds of billions of dollars in cross-border trade, millions of jobs, and entire supply chains was decided without reading the economic report prepared by the administration's own advisors. If that doesn't make you pause for a second, it probably should. Musk also revealed something even more disturbing. In a private conversation at the White House, a senior official inside the administration told him directly that the tariffs were never primarily about economics. They were about messaging. The goal was to project strength, rally domestic political support, and create the public appearance of tough action on trade regardless of whether the policy actually worked. In Musk's words, the tariffs were essentially a communication strategy dressed up as economic policy. That means the real-world effects on American companies, factories, workers, and supply chains were treated as secondary considerations. The priority was the political message, the optics, the narrative. And when you step back and look at what has happened since the trade war began, you can start to see why that revelation matters so much. The third revelation Musk shared might be the most alarming of all. During a meeting with senior administration officials, Musk asked a simple but critical question. What happens when Canada retaliates? What happens if they start redirecting supply chains toward Europe and Asia? What happens if they use their energy exports, mineral resources, or industrial partnerships as leverage? What is the contingency plan? According to Musk, the room went silent. After a long pause, someone finally responded with a vague statement. Canada will come around. They need us more than we need them. Musk pressed again. Where is the scenario modeling? Where is the game theory analysis? Where is the exit strategy if Canada does not come around? Again, silence. And at that moment, Musk realized something that is now sending shockwaves through the business world. There was a plan to impose tariffs, but there was never a plan for what happens next. No contingency planning, no second move, no exit strategy. In chess terms, Musk said, that isn't strategy. That's a blunder. And now that blunder is unfolding in real time across the American economy. The timing of Musk's break could not be worse for the administration, because tensions with Canada are escalating simultaneously across multiple sectors. Aviation, automotive manufacturing, mineral supply chains, energy distribution, and international trade alliances are all being affected at the same time. For example, a new aviation directive from Canada has just hit the airline industry with massive financial consequences. Overflight fees for American carriers have increased by 85%, while European airlines received a 30% discount for using the exact same airspace. 14 major transport routes have been restricted, forcing renegotiations that could take months. The estimated financial impact on the airline industry alone is $9.6 billion annually. And remember, airlines typically operate on margins between 2% and 4%. That means this policy shift is not just painful. It's potentially devastating. American Airlines, Delta, and United were forced into emergency strategy sessions almost immediately. In a single trading day, nearly $28 billion in combined market value vanished. And here's the part that makes the situation even more complicated. There is no clear countermeasure. Sovereign airspace is protected by international law. Geography cannot be sanctioned, which means Washington has very few tools available to respond. When you hear Musk say there was no contingency plan, and then you watch something like this unfold, it becomes harder and harder to argue that he's exaggerating. And aviation is only one piece of the puzzle. At the same time, the integration between American and Canadian auto manufacturing is beginning to fracture. Canada's 30-day transition window on new tariff structures is expiring. Within days, every auto component crossing the border will face full tariff treatment at each crossing. And that matters because the average vehicle crosses the border about 7 times during production. Each crossing adds another tariff calculation based on the cumulative value of the vehicle parts, including previous tariffs. The cost compounds rapidly. The big 3 automakers are already reporting the first wave of impacts. Roughly $3,000 added to the cost of every vehicle. Production slowdowns at plants dependent on Canadian components. Emergency supply chain restructuring plans that could cost tens of billions of dollars and take years to fully implement. And as all of this unfolds, Musk's earlier warning keeps echoing in the background. There was a plan for the first move, but there was no plan for what comes next. If you're watching this situation closely, you can almost feel the moment when strategy turns into improvisation, when long-term planning gives way to short-term reactions. And historically speaking, that's rarely where things stabilize. In the next part, we'll look at why Musk himself reached the breaking point and why the trade war is hitting Tesla harder than many people realize. And before we continue, share your thoughts in the comments. Do you think Musk's revelations changed the entire narrative around this trade war? If you find this analysis valuable, don't forget to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next breakdown. To understand why this rupture matters, you have to understand who Musk is in relation to this administration. He isn't a political enemy looking for a headline. He isn't a media commentator throwing opinions from a studio. He isn't a foreign leader with an agenda. Musk was one of the most powerful business figures on the planet who publicly aligned himself with Donald Trump, had direct access to the White House, attended strategy discussions, and communicated with the president personally on trade issues. That changes everything. When Warren Buffett criticizes a trade war, the response can be, he's a Democrat, he's biased, he's protecting his portfolio. When Canada criticizes, it's easy to label them the adversary. When the media criticizes, the reflex is fake news. But when Musk speaks, there's no clean dismissal available. Because Musk was inside, he was close enough to see the machinery turning, close enough to watch briefings being delivered, close enough to ask questions in the room, close enough to hear the answers, or in this case, the silence. And here's the key point Musk emphasized. His motivation for breaking wasn't ideology. It was financial reality. Tesla's supply chain is being shredded by the tariff policy in ways that show up directly, measurably, and undeniably on earnings reports that every investor on Earth can read. Tesla depends heavily on Canadian critical minerals. Nickel, cobalt, lithium. These are not minor inputs. These are the backbone of battery production, and batteries are the single largest cost component in the electric vehicle supply chain. When that flow is threatened or made more expensive, the damage is immediate and structural. Canadian aluminum also matters far more than most people realize. It goes straight into body panels, the lightweight material that supports Tesla's range advantage over heavier competitors. The higher the cost of aluminum, the more Tesla's design advantage gets taxed into the ground. Then there are electrical components and specialized subassemblies sourced from Canadian suppliers, integrated throughout Tesla's manufacturing process. These are not plug-and-play parts you swap overnight. They represent years of engineering, optimization, and manufacturing alignment. Tariffs don't just raise prices. They punish the entire architecture of a supply chain built to function across an integrated border. Now here's where the damage becomes brutal. It's not just the tariffs themselves. It's tariff compounding. Each vehicle, on average, crosses the border about 7 times during production. Every crossing triggers tariffs calculated on cumulative value, including previous tariffs. That creates a multiplication effect, not a simple surcharge. It's a compounding spiral. And that spiral is hitting Tesla with the same exponential escalation that's crushing the big three automakers. But for Tesla, Musk argued, the threat goes even deeper than cost. The Canadian auto sector is restructuring in real time. Under new trade agreements with Germany, Japan, and Korea, Canadian battery materials and industrial capacity are being redirected toward European and Asian manufacturers. That means Tesla's essential inputs aren't only becoming more expensive. They are being pulled away and locked into long-term contracts with Tesla's competitors. So the risk is two-layered. First, Tesla pays more. Second, Tesla may not be able to secure enough supply at any price because the supply itself is being diverted elsewhere. And when you hear that, it becomes clear why Musk's tone shifted from frustration to open confrontation. Losing money is one thing. Losing the strategic foundation of your supply chain is something else entirely. At this point, you can almost hear the reaction in the business community. This isn't a temporary trade dispute anymore. This is supply chain warfare, and Canada is moving like a country that expects this to last for years, not weeks. Musk also pointed to the broader exposure across his empire. Beyond automotive manufacturing, SpaceX and Starlink face complications tied to Canadian Arctic sovereignty assertions. Canada's regulatory authority over Arctic communications intersects with satellite coverage in ways that can create operational friction, legal barriers, and strategic uncertainty. In other words, the trade war isn't contained to one sector. It spills into aerospace, communications, and national security adjacent territory. Musk's businesses span multiple domains affected by this conflict, and the aggregate damage across all of them pushed him past the threshold of silence. And this is where Musk's personality becomes relevant. His tolerance for absorbing large losses quietly, especially when he believes those losses come from avoidable incompetence, is essentially non-existent. This is a man who has publicly battled the Securities and Exchange Commission, publicly feuded with short sellers, and publicly attacked governments when he believed they interfered with his operations. He doesn't just accept losses and move on when he thinks the cause is preventable stupidity. So when Musk says the tariff policy is avoidable stupidity, it isn't just an insult. It's a warning from someone who has built a career on fighting back when he feels boxed in by bad decision-making. He argues this policy is costing his companies, his shareholders, and the American economy hundreds of billions of dollars. And from his perspective, the most infuriating part is that it didn't have to happen this way. The administration had the analysis, it had the modeling, it had industry data in front of it, but it chose theater over planning. And that is why this rupture wasn't a gentle disagreement. It was a snap. Now, Musk didn't just criticize the policy from a distance. He laid out specific revelations, 4 of them, that together form a devastating narrative. The unread briefings, the admission that it was about messaging, the absence of any plan after retaliation, and the personal exchange with Trump that reduced a multi-billion-dollar supply chain disruption to a slogan about looking strong. In the next part, we'll walk through those revelations one by one, and why the 4th one, the one Musk described as a direct conversation with Trump, may be the sentence that collapses the entire image of control. And before we continue, drop your take in the comments. Is this a responsible whistleblowing moment from an insider, or is it a business leader protecting his bottom line? If you want the next segment immediately, hit like and subscribe so you stay with the full breakdown. Musk did not simply criticize the trade war in broad terms. What made his public break so explosive was that he presented a sequence of very specific revelations. 4 moments, 4 interactions, 4 pieces of inside information that together paint a picture far more damaging than any outside criticism ever could. The first revelation was about the briefings that were never read. According to Musk, the administration had already received a complete economic assessment before the tariff decision was made. This was not a quick talking point document. It was a full analytical report prepared by the Council of Economic Advisors, supported by supplementary data from Tesla, General Motors, Ford, and the major automotive trade associations. The analysis included detailed projections. It showed exactly how tariff compounding would work when vehicle components crossed the border multiple times. It modeled the impact of 7 border crossings per vehicle and demonstrated how tariffs would accumulate exponentially. It predicted production losses in American auto plants. It outlined Canadian retaliation scenarios, including energy leverage, mineral export restrictions, and industrial supply chain redirection. Every scenario now unfolding was already inside that briefing. But Musk said the president never read it. He explained that 2 days after the document was delivered, he asked Trump about specific conclusions from the report. Trump looked at him with confusion and had no idea what he was referring to. The entire analysis had been dismissed as overly pessimistic before it was even considered. Just pause for a second and think about that reaction. Months of economic modeling, data from the largest manufacturers in North America, supply chain simulations, and it all gets waved away because it doesn't fit the political narrative of strength. That moment alone raised serious questions in the business community about how decisions were being made. The second revelation came from a private conversation Musk had inside the White House. During that discussion, a senior official involved in trade policy told him something remarkably candid. The tariffs were not primarily about economics. They were about messaging. The strategy, according to the official, was to project strength, rally domestic political support, and demonstrate toughness on trade. Whether the tariffs produced measurable economic benefits was almost secondary to the political signal they sent. Musk later summarized it with a line that is echoed across financial media and diplomatic circles alike. The tariffs were a communication strategy wearing the clothes of economic policy. In other words, the policy was designed to look strong rather than to function effectively. And when you hear that explanation, suddenly many of the strange contradictions of the trade war begin to make sense. Policies that hurt domestic industries, retaliation that seemed predictable yet unprepared for, escalations that triggered damage without any visible strategic objective. Because if the goal was messaging rather than economics, the logic changes entirely. The third revelation is the one that has reverberated most powerfully through Washington and across allied capitals. Musk described a meeting with senior administration officials where he asked a simple, direct question. What happens when Canada retaliates? Not if. What happens when supply chains shift to Europe and Asia? What happens if Canadian minerals are redirected away from American manufacturers? What happens if energy exports become leverage? What is the contingency plan? According to Musk, the room went silent. After a long pause, someone eventually said that Canada would come around. The assumption was that Canada needed the United States more than the United States needed Canada. Musk pressed further. Where is the scenario modeling? Where is the strategic response if Canada refuses to back down? Where is the exit strategy? Again, silence. And that silence, Musk later said, was the moment he realized the scale of the problem. There was a plan to impose tariffs, but there was no plan for what happens next. No second move. In chess, a first move without a second move is not a strategy. It's a mistake. And the consequences of that mistake are now unfolding across multiple sectors simultaneously. The fourth revelation was perhaps the most personal and the most symbolic. Musk described a one-on-one conversation where he presented Trump with Tesla's internal supply chain data, detailed numbers showing how tariffs multiplied at each border crossing, component-by-component analysis demonstrating how costs would explode across the production process. He also showed projections of lost competitiveness for American electric vehicle manufacturers as European and Asian companies avoided the tariff structure. Trump's response, according to Musk, was simple. We will figure it out. Elon, the important thing is that we look strong. Musk's public reaction to that moment was blunt. You don't figure out a multi-billion-dollar supply chain disruption. You either plan for it or you get destroyed by it. And now the destruction is becoming visible everywhere. Auto plants facing rising costs. Airlines absorbing billions in new aviation fees. Electricity prices climbing in the northeastern United States as Canadian energy leverage increases. Critical mineral supply chains shifting away from American manufacturers. What Musk described as a theoretical risk months ago is now unfolding across 5 different sectors at the same time. And watching that happen, it's hard not to ask the same question Musk asked in that meeting. Where was the second move? Because when economic pressure hits simultaneously in aviation, automotive manufacturing, minerals, energy, and international trade alliances, responding requires coordination, planning, strategy. What Musk revealed suggests none of that existed. And that's why his statements landed like a shockwave. Not because they introduced brand new criticisms, but because they confirmed existing concerns from someone who was actually present inside the decision-making process. Now, the outside world is watching something even more significant unfold. Canada is escalating its response across multiple domains at once, and every one of those escalations is beginning to match the very scenarios described in the briefings that were never read. In the final part, we'll examine what Warren Buffett said about this moment, why he believes the trade war has reached its final stage, and why Musk's break may mark the exact point where the entire strategy begins to collapse. And before we move on, tell me what you think. Do these revelations prove there was never a real strategy behind the tariffs, or is Musk exaggerating the situation? Leave your perspective in the comments, and if you want to see how this story ends, make sure to like the video and subscribe for the final segment. While Musk's revelations were spreading across political circles and financial markets, another voice entered the conversation: Warren Buffett. And when Buffett speaks about economic patterns, the world tends to listen carefully. He has watched governments, corporations, and entire markets rise and collapse for more than 70 years. According to Buffett, what is happening right now follows a pattern he has seen many times before. He explained that there is a critical difference between criticism that comes from outside a system and criticism that comes from inside it. When the criticism comes from opponents, the response is predictable. You question the motive. You dismiss the source. You say they have an agenda or they don't understand the situation. That defense can last for a surprisingly long time. But when the same criticism comes from someone who was inside the room, someone who had direct access to the decision-making process, that defense collapses. It stops being opinion and starts looking like testimony. And that is exactly what Musk provided. For months, economists, analysts, industry leaders, and even allied governments had been warning that the tariff strategy lacked a clear economic foundation. But each time those warnings appeared, the administration had an answer ready. They were pessimists. They were political opponents. They were foreign interests trying to weaken the United States. Now Musk, a former ally with direct access to the president and the strategy meetings, confirmed those same warnings from inside the room. That changes the equation entirely. Buffett described the pattern in simple stages that appear again and again when leaders face pressure created by their own decisions. Stage 1 is denial. The strategy is working. The results just have not appeared yet. Stage 2 is blame. If the strategy fails, it must be someone else's fault: the advisors, the media, the foreign partners. Stage 3 is erratic action. Decisions begin to contradict each other because they are driven by panic rather than analysis. And then comes Stage 4. The allies leave. Buffett said that moment is usually the turning point, because when allies walk away publicly, it signals that the internal support structure holding the strategy together has collapsed. Musk, in Buffett's assessment, just confirmed that Stage 4 has arrived, and he did not leave quietly. He left with evidence, with specific conversations, with documented warnings that were ignored. When that happens, the damage spreads beyond politics. It reaches markets, corporations, and international alliances at the same time. Almost immediately after Musk's break, something remarkable began to happen in the business world. Corporate leaders who had been silent started speaking. Within 48 hours, statements appeared from auto executives, airline leaders, manufacturing associations, and technology companies. Many of them said publicly what they had been saying privately for months. The tariff policy was harming American industry. What changed was not their analysis. What changed was the signal Musk sent. As long as one major business ally remained publicly aligned with the administration, many corporate leaders hesitated to speak. That final ally is now gone. And once the first major voice breaks the silence, the rest often follow. It's like pressure behind a dam. The structure can hold for a long time, but once the first crack appears, the release becomes unstoppable. At the same time, the markets began adjusting their expectations. Institutional investors had previously treated the trade war as a temporary disruption. Painful, yes, but eventually negotiable. They assumed there was some strategic framework inside the administration guiding the process toward a resolution. Musk's revelations destroyed that assumption. The market is now repricing the situation not as temporary disruption but as structural damage. That shift influences investment decisions worth trillions of dollars. Companies deciding whether to build factories in the United States or somewhere else. Supply chains deciding where to relocate production. Investors deciding where to allocate capital for the next decade. Those decisions don't reverse overnight. And politically, the effects are already visible. Musk holds enormous influence within the technology sector and among donors aligned with the Republican coalition. His break provides cover for lawmakers who had quietly opposed the tariff strategy but hesitated to say so publicly. Now, senators from manufacturing states, aviation hubs, and energy-dependent regions are beginning to question the trade policy openly. Congressional committees are requesting briefings about the actual economic impact of the tariffs compared with the projections that were originally dismissed. The coalition supporting the trade war is starting to fracture. The White House response only made the situation more visible. At first, the administration attempted to dismiss Musk by arguing that he was motivated by his own business interests. But that argument immediately reinforced Musk's point. His businesses are suffering precisely because of the trade policy, which is exactly why his criticism carries weight. Trump responded personally on social media, attacking Musk's loyalty and business competence. Yet the moment the president attacked Musk publicly, the break became undeniable and permanent. Inside the administration, the reaction appeared divided. Some staff members wanted to minimize the confrontation and move on. Others pushed for an aggressive counterattack against Musk. But no one produced a detailed rebuttal to the central claim Musk had made. There was no plan for what happens next. Meanwhile, Canada's leadership responded with calm precision. Mark Carney summarized the situation in a single sentence that echoed across international media. Canada had warned from the beginning that the trade policy lacked both economic foundation and strategic framework, and Musk had simply confirmed that reality. Canada did not need to celebrate the moment. The contrast between the two sides was already clear. Canada continued executing a methodical strategy, building new trade partnerships and strengthening supply chains. Washington appeared increasingly reactive, responding to crises as they appeared. For governments around the world watching the conflict unfold, Musk's revelation sent a powerful signal. If an insider says there was never a strategy, then negotiations change. Why offer concessions to a government that may not have a plan to process them? Why invest political capital negotiating with a partner whose policies might shift without warning? Every international negotiation involving the United States is now being recalculated through that lens. And that is why many analysts describe this moment as the inflection point of the trade war. Not because of one Canadian action, not because of one interview, but because two forces collided at the same time: external pressure from Canada escalating across aviation, automotive manufacturing, minerals, energy, and alliances. And internal confirmation from one of the administration's most visible business allies that the strategy itself never had a foundation. When pressure arrives from every direction simultaneously, structures rarely survive. For months, the image held together. The image of a strategist playing chess while others played checkers, a leader whose chaotic style supposedly concealed a deeper long-term plan. But Musk's testimony shattered that narrative. According to someone who was present in the room, there was no chess game. There was a first move and an empty board. No second move. No contingency planning. No scenario modeling. No exit strategy. Just the assumption that the other side would eventually surrender. But the other side did not surrender. Instead, Canada responded with one of the most comprehensive economic counter-strategies ever deployed by a middle-power nation. Aviation rules, supply chain restructuring, mineral leverage, energy pressure, international alliances expanding week by week. And now, even former allies inside the American system are confirming that the board was empty from the start. Buffett said he has seen this pattern many times across decades of leadership failures. It always begins with confidence, then denial, then blame, then erratic decisions. And finally, the allies walk away. Right now, Canada continues to escalate. Musk has stepped away. The economic briefings remain unread. And the gap between looking strong and actually being strong is now measured in hundreds of billions of dollars in damage to the very industries the trade war was meant to protect. What do you think about Musk's revelations and the direction of this trade war? Share your perspective in the comments below. If you found this analysis useful, don't forget to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next deep dive into the global events shaping our world.